Hey, Allison, this was a Memorial Day weekend that no one was hoping for here on Cape Cod, to be perfectly honest with you. Not only do they have to deal with the pandemic, but the weather has been downright lousy. Today it is cloudy. The temperature has gotten up to about 60 degrees. And so a lot of people have stayed away from the beaches, even though the Massachusetts beaches are now fully open. Although, as you can see here at Craigville Beach, there are no lifeguards. So if you're swimming at your own risk. Because people have stayed away, that is really bad news for the businesses here on Cape Cod. They rely on tourists. In fact, tourist spending accounts for $1.3 billion of this area's economy, and most of it happens between Memorial Day and Labor Day. Across the street from where I am, I'm here at Craigville Beach in Centerville, are two restaurants, the Barnacle and Barnacle 2, and they are owned by Tony and Carolyn Ninivaggi, and they are two businesses that primarily rely on takeout, but they say even that in the era of COVID, their business has been turned upside down. If this was a normal Memorial Day, what would the Barnacle look like?
See the line, see the street, the line would be from the window out almost to the street, and that's probably with two registers going. Luckily, we do have the extra 2 weeks this year, so hopefully that will help us a bit. But I don't think we can make up for such a loss because of this pandemic.
Now, the Ninivagis say they typically, during the summer, up until about mid-July, all the money that they earn, that's their break-even point. After that, it's all profit. But this year, they're not quite sure because nobody really knows what's going to happen. The big key for them is when the governor decides to allow hotels, motels, Airbnb, short-term rentals to open up, because that's what really drives the economy here on Cape Cod. And June 8th is the day everybody's got circled on their calendar, because once those start to open up, they believe that will help bring the tourists back. When the tourists do come back to Cape Cod, they're going to find some different rules at the beach. It's going to be much like anywhere else you go in the state of Massachusetts. You need to wear a face mask. If you can't social distance, you need to stay 6 feet apart. If you are going to put your blanket down on the beach, it needs to be 12 feet from other beach goers. And if you're bringing a crowd, it can be no more than 10 people. Allison?
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.